Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today and for attending this webinar in Aspire Australia's General Skilled Migration series and today's topic, Understanding Australia's General Skilled Migration Program. The presentation should run for about 35 minutes, which would give us 5 to 10 minutes of questions at the end. If you do have questions, would you mind just typing them into the chat box and I will have a look at those at the very end. I often find that most of the questions are answered by the time we get to the end, so I'll have a look at them then. And I have put you all on mute and turned off your video so that we've got a nice clean recording, which you'll be able to access later. So just to let you know that any information that's provided in today's session does not constitute professional advice, and you should seek your own specific individual advice from a registered migration agent regarding your own circumstances. So let's get started. Here at Aspire Australia, we are on a mission. We want to ensure that intending migrants like you get the right information and have a clear understanding of the GSM framework in order to realistically understand your visa prospects. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of commentary, but what we've found over time is that there's a lack of understanding of the framework, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Hi, I'm Sarah Gillis and I'm your presenter today. I've worked in the Australian migration industry for more than 25 years, both as a solicitor and accredited specialist, and now as a registered migration agent. And over that time, I've assisted many migrants through the various general skilled migration programs. And whilst the laws have changed over the years, I've learned many strategies that have helped my clients achieve success. So I'll be sharing some of those strategies with you today. Now, if you recognise the opportunities that Australia has to offer and are willing to take the necessary steps to achieve your dream of living and working in Australia, then you're in the right spot today. And especially if you want to follow the right path. So by the end of today's session, you will have an understanding of the GSM framework up to the point of getting what I like to call the golden ticket, the invitation to apply for your visa. So we won't be going into the visa criteria, etc., but everything up until that point. You'll achieve an understanding of all the elements that fit together to form part of the GSM process and understand how they interrelate so that you can then develop your own strategy for GSM success. So what is GSM? As the name suggests, it is part of Australia's general skilled migration program, and it does not require an employer sponsorship. It's been designed to meet Australia's changing skills needs. And what we're seeing at the moment with the COVID-19 situation is that that is being addressed in different ways by the states, territories and federal government. It is a highly competitive program where there are limited positions available. It is still the foundation skilled migration program for Australia, but it is very selective and by invitation only. So let's look at an overview of the different elements that form part of the GSM process, and we will go through each step in due course. So the three fundamental criteria are nominating an occupation and obtaining a skills assessment, meeting the core English requirement, and achieving the base level of points. That leads towards the lodgement of a submission of an expression of interest. the adoption of an appropriate strategy depending on your circumstances, and leading to the final outcome, which, as I said, is the golden ticket. This is your goal to get this invitation to apply for the visa. So what visas are available? These are the 3 visas currently available in the GSM program. The 189, subclass 189 skilled independent visa is a permanent residence visa. And the person who achieves that visa can work anywhere in Australia, in any occupation. There's no sponsorship required. It's a very nice, free and easy visa. The 190 skilled nominated is also a permanent residence visa. And in that case, the candidate has obtained a sponsorship by a state or territory government. And we're going to discuss that later. And the final visa available is the 491 Skilled Work Regional Provisional Visa. It is a temporary 5-year visa where the holder will live, work and study in a designated regional area for at least 3 years. And that visa can lead to permanent residence through the 191 visa category, which will come into effect in November 2022. So of these 3 visas, whilst the 189, if you're eligible for it, would be the one to go for, it is the 491 that in fact gets priority processing, because the Australian government is trying to encourage people to move to regional areas of Australia. And the 491 is a good way to do it because it has conditions which basically tie the visa holder to living in that area. The second priority ranking comes with the 190 visa, and after that, the 189 visa. So the first step in the process is nominating an occupation and obtaining a positive skills assessment. This is the process which allows the Australian government to determine whether you as a visa applicant have the skills that are equivalent to the skills that would be available in Australia. So are the qualifications and experience you've received overseas equivalent to the skills an Australian in that occupation would have? So the skills assessment is actually the very foundation of your whole general skill migration process and requires some thought and consideration before selecting your occupation and deciding how to proceed. The skills assessment will determine which visa you are eligible for. It will influence your ability to claim points for employment, and it will indicate to you the level of competition you may encounter through the competitive GSM process. The information you provide with your skills assessment will be immutable. It will be very difficult later for you to recharacterize the information that you're giving at this point of time. So it's essential that that foundation is laid strongly. So the starting point is selecting your occupation, and your occupation needs to fall onto one of the 3 skilled occupation lists. If your occupation does not fall into one of these lists, then you're ineligible to apply under this program. So the 3 lists are, as you see there, the MLT SSL, the medium and long-term skills shortage list. This list contains occupations which are in strong demand across the whole country. Occupations include the traditional professions like teaching, the medical professions, IT, accounting, law, as well as some occupations, trade occupations like chefs and mechanics. The STSOL is the short-term skills occupation list, and that includes some degree qualified occupations in the arts, in sciences, in finance, some paraprofessional occupations, technician occupations, and a large number of trades. And the regional occupation list has a very diverse range of occupations, ranging from managers down to dental hygienist, flight attendant, and jockey. So the ROL is available only, as you can see, for the 491 state-sponsored visa. So it allows states and regional areas to identify occupations that are in demand in that specific area, that are at a lower skill level than are generally required across the country. So for the 189 skilled independent visa, you can only apply if your occupation is on the medium and long-term list. And same if you're sponsored for the 491 visa by a family member. And as you can see, if you have an occupation on the short-term list, then you will need a state sponsorship, either in the 190 permanent visa or in the 491 state category. So, of course, you can't just say that you'll select any occupation, because you do need to get a favourable skills assessment in that occupation. So occupation definitions are available, which will explain not only the qualification and skill level, but the generic tasks that are undertaken in that occupation. So once you've looked at the list and perhaps identified which occupations may be available to you, you then need to look at whether the tasks of those occupations match your qualifications or experience. So for most occupations, a qualification is required, but not every occupation. For many, work experience is required, and for some, there are additional requirements such as English or registration. So just to give you some examples, for the occupation of marketing specialist, you would need a bachelor degree and 1 year's post-qualification experience as a marketing specialist. For accountants, you would need a bachelor or higher degree with the appropriate level of accounting content, and you would need to have either proficient English level or have completed a professional year in Australia. For tradespeople who have qualifications, they will also need 3 years minimum experience. Or for tradespeople who do not have qualifications, they may need 5 years or more work experience. So you can already see that there are a range of options available and requirements and criteria for different occupations. Happily, for those who have studied in Australia, there are usually some relaxed criteria in relation to the skills assessments. So, for example, for an ICT professional from overseas, he or she would usually have to show a qualification plus 2 to 4 years subsequent work experience. For an IT graduate from an Australian institution, they would only have to show 1 year postgraduate experience or a professional year. And for tradespeople who from overseas would need to show a minimum of 3 years experience, if you have studied a trade qualification in Australia, then that can reduce to just 1 year. So there's some benefit in having spent money and time living and working and studying in Australia. So you may be eligible for a skills assessment in more than one occupation, and you can certainly apply for multiple skills assessments and proceed with multiple processes for those different occupations. But as we progress through the presentation, you might think about some of the other factors that will come into play. For example, you can't claim the same work experience as 2 different occupations. So the skills assessment is the first criterion and will advise you whether your skills are recognised in Australia, and if so, you can then move on to the next step. So the next step is English. So it is a requirement for each primary applicant to have competent English, and this is measured through the results of an English test, which is either the PTE, IELTS or Cambridge test. Results are available or valid for 3 years. So once the English has been achieved, you will look at your point score. So as I mentioned earlier, a minimum of 65 points is required to enter the game, the GSM game. And points are calculated across a range of factors. Now, whilst 65 gets you into the game, for most candidates, it will not be sufficient to be successful. So as we go through these, consider what point score you may have at the moment and how you may be able to achieve, improve that. So the first factor is age. Candidates can be between 18 and 45 years of age, with the sweet spot being 25 to 32 years. So your points for age are assessed at the time of visa invitation. That's when you get your golden ticket. So it's important to know whether you're going to cross an age bracket and lose points, so that you can take that into account when you're totting up your points. As we said, everyone must have, all primary applicants must have competent English, but you'll get 0 points for that. So to claim points for English, you need to have a higher level of English score at either proficient or superior. Now you can keep resitting the test as many times as you like, but of course there's not much point doing that if you haven't improved your English in between. So taking courses or getting some private tuition or doing some self-study is certainly recommended. And we will be sending out to you a bonus English guide, which will explain to you the scores required under the different tests. So the next factor in the points test is qualification. So you can achieve points if you have a diploma or trade certificate, a bachelor or a doctorate degree. There are no specific points for a master degree. And a bachelor degree must be a minimum of 3 years full-time. A doctorate degree must come after an honours bachelor degree or a master's degree. So if you have not done a bachelor degree but have gone straight to an MBA through work experience, for example, that won't be equivalent to, there's no points for the master, but if that is equivalent to a bachelor degree, then you may claim points for that. It's important to know that your qualifications must be considered against Australian standards. So whilst for international students who may have gained entry to an Australian university based on some overseas qualifications, that does not necessarily mean that those qualifications will meet the Australian standards for migration. So it's important to check that out. And you can only claim points for one qualification, so you'll claim for the highest one that you have. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's some benefits for being in Australia. So there are various points available for having completed different types of study in Australia. The first is the Australian study requirement, which anyone who has or intends to apply for a 485 visa may be familiar with. This is where you've completed one or more Australian qualifications, which are registered under CRICOS for a minimum of 92 weeks, and you have spent at least 16 months in Australia studying those courses. If you've done that in a regional area, then you may gain additional points. So regional has recently been redefined to include the whole of Australia except for Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. So there may be some international students who started studying outside Sydney, Melbourne or Brisbane, but in an area that previously was not considered regional. That may now be considered regional if it's not Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, and you can retrospectively claim points for that study. Again, you must have completed 2 years study completely in that regional area, living and studying there. There are also points available for specialist qualifications, which are qualifications at master's level, master's by research or PhD level in science, IT or engineering. And the professional year is available for graduates of ICT, accounting or engineering. Now, I often find that many people balk at paying $10,000 or more for a professional year in order to claim 5 points. But I also have met a lot of people who come to me towards the end of their 485 visa, scrambling for an additional 5 points, and they have not done the professional year. So whilst it may be expensive, everything in this GSM game is going to cost you time or money. So do keep that in your bag of tricks, that the professional year, if you're in the ICT, accounting or engineering field, may be worth doing. Now, points are available for employment with stronger weighting given to employment undertaken in Australia than overseas. And your employment must meet each of these requirements. So the first one is that it's in your nominated occupation or in a closely related occupation. So you've nominated your occupation and obtained a skills assessment. Now that occupation has a 6-digit code associated with it. So if you want to claim employment, you must have worked in either that 6-digit code or in any occupation that has the same first 4 digits. So for example, if you obtained a skills assessment as a developer programmer, the code for that is 261312. You may have worked as a software engineer, which is 261313. That's okay because they have the same first 4 digits. If you've worked as a marketing specialist, or you've got your skills assessment as a marketing specialist, which is 225113, but you're working in PR, which we would all say is a related area, you won't be able to claim the work experience because the occupation code has a different first 4 digits. Similarly, you must be certain that the work you've done is in your occupation. So a classic example is someone who's graduated as an accountant but is actually working as a bookkeeper. Now, accountant is a professional occupation which requires a degree and has a full range of tasks that you can look up in the generic occupation description. A bookkeeper has a more limited range of tasks. So it's important to understand whether the work you are doing does meet that occupation description. Second requirement is that it is at the skill level. This means in most cases that your work experience comes after the qualification. So if we take marketing specialist again as an example, you need the degree first before you can claim the work experience. And in that example, the 1-year work experience you used for the skills assessment purpose can't be used for points purposes here. Work must be a minimum 20 hours a week, because if you've worked less than that, it is unlikely that you have undertaken the full range, breadth and depth of tasks for that occupation. That's the rationale behind that. And your work experience must also be lawful. So if you worked less than 20 hours a week, so if you had 10 hours at 10 hours a week, you will not be able to claim any of those weeks for employment. If you worked 25 hours a week, that is fine, except if you do not hold a visa in Australia that allows you to do so. So if you were working on a tourist visa unlawfully, you would not be able to claim that work experience. If you hold a student visa, you are allowed to work 40 hours a fortnight. So if one fortnight you worked 45 hours, you would need to analyse how many hours you worked each week. Maybe one week you worked 20 hours and the other week you worked 25 hours. So then you could only claim one of those weeks. So any periods of unlawful work cannot be claimed. Now, I've often come across situations where clients have believed that they could claim maybe 3 years work experience in Australia. And they say, I've worked part-time, but that may have been less than a regular 20 hours a week, or may have been more than 20 hours on some occasions and unlawful. So in those cases, we've had to analyse each and every week which visa was held at that time to determine whether that week of employment can be claimed. So it's important to know this before you start claiming points. And the employment must be paid, so it can't be voluntary. Now, when you're claiming points for employment, you also need to think in advance that the Department of Home Affairs will want to see evidence of this. So that will include an employment reference that will detail your tasks. It will include appointment termination letters, contracts. It will include pay slips, tax documents, superannuation documents, bank statements. So if you say you have worked for 5 years, but really you only have evidence and you can only get evidence of 3 years, you have to be cautious about what points you're going to claim. And employment is only considered within the past 10 years. An easier factor to get 5 points for is sitting the Natty Community Language Exam, 20 minutes exam. If you have very good English at probably proficient or above, and you're fluent in another language, then you can sit this test, and it's available only for people in Australia. Now, relationship status has become a key part of the points test. And it's important to note that single applicants or applicants with skilled partners will receive the highest ranking when their application is being considered against someone else's with the same point score. So you may say, well, that's very easy. I'm either single or I'm partnered. But it may not be quite that easy. If you're single, you have no partner, you have no boyfriend, no girlfriend, you're not married, then it should be quite clear that you are single. If you recently have become single, however, for example, you're married but you've recently separated, you need to ensure that you have evidence of that, and if you or your partner have been holding the same visa, that the Department of Home Affairs have been notified of the breakdown of that relationship, because the Department of Home Affairs may doubt that you are actually single. When it comes to considering whether or not you are partnered, the usual definitions apply. So you are either married or in a de facto relationship. Under de facto relationship, you have 2 options. Either you have a registered relationship or you have been, in the usual case, living together on a genuine domestic basis for 12 months. Whether you're married or de facto, you need to be in a genuine and committed relationship to the exclusion of all others, with the intention of a lifelong relationship. So if you've started going out with someone for a couple of weeks, that is not a partner and would not come within the definition of de facto. So if you do have a partner and that partner is an Australian citizen or permanent resident, then you can achieve 10 points. If your partner is not an Australian, then you have the option of your partner sitting an English test and achieving competent English in order to give you 5 points, or obtaining a skills assessment and competent English to give you 10 points. In terms of that skills assessment, it's important that your partner has an occupation on the same list or lists for which you're eligible. So if you're wanting to apply only for the 189 visa, your occupation must be on the medium and long-term list, and your partner's must also. If you're applying for the 190 visa, as we saw in the table earlier, you can be on the medium and long-term list or the short-term list. In that case, your partner could also be on either of those lists. So skills refers to the skills assessment, similar to what you have undertaken. Now, if you have an occupation on the medium and long-term list and you're lucky enough to have an Australian relative, you may be eligible for family sponsorship. So an Australian relative is a parent or child or sibling, an aunt, uncle, niece or nephew, a grandparent or a first cousin. They must be a permanent resident or citizen, usually resident in a designated regional area of Australia. Now that again has the same definition as earlier, so not Sydney, Melbourne or Brisbane. Now usually resident doesn't have a fixed period, so there's no minimum period in which the relative should have lived in the designated regional area, and each case will be looked at on its own circumstances. A period of 6 months or more is likely to be indicative of usual residence, but a period of less than that may also be acceptable. For example, if the relative has moved very recently but has taken on a full-time job, has signed up for a 12-month lease, then there are indicators that the person is not only living there now, but has an intention to live there into the future. And the final requirement for family sponsorship is that the sponsor has the capacity to support you financially and provide you with accommodation. So if you're lucky enough to meet all those requirements, then you can get 15 points. And that will lead you to the 491 visa. And that has good priority ranking. Unfortunately, probably not a lot of people that can meet all those requirements. So you've totted up your points under all those factors. And you're now at the next point, which is being eligible to submit your expression of interest. So your expression of interest is not a visa application. It is throwing your name into a pool of candidates from which states, territories and the federal government can consider you for selection. Your EOI will be valid for 2 years, and during that time you can update your EOI if you improve your English or gain more work experience or professional year, etc. You can keep updating your EOI as you progress. So with your name in that ring, you are now available for selection. And selection will depend on many factors, and most of them are out of your control. The primary one is government policy based on the economy and the quota for your occupation. But also, you are competing against other candidates. You do not know how many candidates there are, what their points are, etc. So there is a lot out of your control, but we'll take back some control shortly. We'll just look at some of the recent monthly selections. They usually take place on the 11th of the month, although in the past month or so it's been a little different because we're heading towards the end of the migration year. So the bright purple is the 189 skilled independent, and the darker purple is the 491 family sponsored visa. So you can see in this screenshot from January that the minimum point score that people were invited at was 90 for the 189. That continued into February, and you can see larger number of 491 visas now being invited. March, still 90 points for the 189 and not quite so many 491s. Now, we don't know if that's just a lower number being selected, or maybe there weren't that many candidates available for selection, or their occupations were not being sought. And in April, we see that for the skilled independent, the lowest mark is 95. And that's because you can see from the numbers that there were very few candidates invited on the 11th of April. So there was an invitation round in May. I don't have the details for that. So, as I said, a lot of that's out of your control. So you now need to find a strategy that's going to help you take back some control and make things work for you. So there are two strategies, the state sponsorship strategy and the high points strategy. The high points strategy really only applies to those with occupations on the MLT SSL who will be applying for the 189 visa. And the strategy there is to achieve as many points as possible. So you just want to improve your English, you need to do whatever you can to get as many points as possible. And given recent selection statistics, you'll want to get at least 90 points. Now, the alternative is the state sponsorship strategy, which, as we discussed before, a state sponsorship is required for those with the 491 and 190, well, I should say with occupations on the STSOL and the ROL, who will move forward to the 491 or the 190 visa. So whilst Australia has its grand migration plan, each of the states also have their migration plans. So they bid for occupations and create their own sub-lists out of the quota that the federal government has each year. So they will select occupations to sponsor for industries and occupations that are in demand now or for which they want to increase growth in the future. So we'll have a look in a moment at some state sponsorship lists, but if your occupation is on a state sponsorship list, then you have the ability to apply to that state for sponsorship. Now, they will all have their own different criteria, which may include that you've lived there, you've studied there, you've worked there, you've got a job offer. There could be a whole range of criteria. They may require you to have a certain English level or a certain amount of work experience. They may require you to have funds for settlement. Now, why would you choose state sponsorship? Again, if you have an occupation on the short term or the regional list, you have to have a state sponsorship. If you're on the 189, and even if you've got your own 90 or 95 points, you may decide to go for a state sponsorship if you're eligible, because you will get priority processing. So the visas available under state sponsorship are those we mentioned earlier, and here you can see some comparisons. The different points available. Obviously the 190 is a permanent visa and the 491 is a temporary visa. The 190 requires you to have a 2-year commitment to living in the specific area, whereas the 491 has a 5-year commitment. Now, you would only opt for the 491 visa if you really do have a commitment to living in the regional area, because you must live in a designated regional area for 3 years before you have the pathway open to you to apply for permanent residence in the skilled migration category. And if you said, I'll just move to the regional area and then maybe my partner will sponsor me later, no, because there is a restriction on accessing other permanent residence categories for a period of 3 years. So you need to think about all of this before even deciding which occupation you'll select or strategy to follow. Here are some recent examples of state availability. Now, because we're towards the end of the financial year, there's not a lot of available. Marketing specialists, generally not available. You can see all the red crosses. You can see that Tasmania does have ticks, as does Northern Territory. They will basically be open for most occupations as long as you have either lived and worked there or studied there. Similarly for the ACT. This one is for registered nurse. You can see there's a little bit more availability for that. So keeping an eye on these changing opportunities is also necessary to see whether your strategy is going to work. And again, you need to be aware of what the specific requirements are for each category. So if Tasmania will sponsor you if you've studied there for 2 years, but you're not prepared to go there, then it's off the list. So if you achieve a state sponsorship, you will achieve an invitation. Similarly, if you're selected through the normal round of invitations for the 189, then you will receive your golden ticket. This is going to open the door to your visa application, which you will lodge within 60 days. By this time, you should clearly know the number of points that you are claiming. You will know that you can evidence those claims. And if there were to be any shortfall in your ability to prove those points, then your visa application will be refused. So if at the time of invitation, you've shown that you've got 100 points, but on presentation and assessment of your evidence, the department believes you only have 90 points, your visa application will be refused. So it's very important not to overclaim your points and to only claim points for which you can provide the evidence. So let's have a look at a few case studies. Have a look at Angela, 24 years old. She has a Bachelor of Commerce degree from her overseas country. She's here as an international student doing a diploma of IT. Her English is okay, she can get by, and she's going out with one of the other students in her college. So her points at the moment for age, she's not yet in the sweet spot, so 25 points, and she has a bachelor degree, so 15 points. So she has a total of 40. Now you can imagine that Angela would be quite demoralised at that score and may think she has no prospects. But we've got two strategies we can look at for her. The first is the high points strategy, where she'll enrol in a 2-year Master of IT degree because she was quite enjoying IT. She'll then be eligible for the 485 visa, during which time she will have time to improve her English score. She will do a professional year, she'll do the community language test, and she may be lucky enough to get 12 months work experience. So at the end of just over a year, Angela's points will look like this. She's now in the sweet spot for age. She's got top points for English. She's got points for her Aussie study, professional year. She's ditched the boyfriend. She's got 10 points for being single, and she has 95 points. So she has a strong chance of being selected for the 189 visa. Now, her alternative strategy is the state sponsorship strategy. She still wants to study IT, but she's willing to go interstate or into a regional area to undertake that study. If she studies in merely a regional area, she will get the additional 5 points for the regional study, but she's going to choose a state that will promise to sponsor her if she finishes 2 years study. So at this stage, she's decided to go to Tasmania to do that study. While she's studying, she's improving her English. She's completed her 2 years study and applied for the 485. But she's also eligible to apply for the state sponsorship. So because she's applying for the state sponsorship, it doesn't really matter how many points she has, but this is how her points tally looks now. So while 75 would not be enough for the 189 visa, most likely, because she has met the specific state criteria, which is study and live in the state for 2 years, she's going to be selected and she gets the golden ticket to apply for the 190. So, some hot tips. Start early. Don't leave it to the last minute. As soon as you've decided you love Australia, think about how you're going to approach your strategy and get some advice. Speak to a registered migration agent and ensure that you have a plan in place that is going to work for you. Now, you may have plan A, plan B, plan C, even plan D, and there are often many ways to proceed. I mean, we've seen at least 2 ways that Angela could proceed. So you need to weigh up time, cost, location, whether you can work or not work, a whole range of factors to rank your plans A, B, and C and make a decision on the plan you're going to follow. You need to commit to that plan, commit to seeing it through right to the end. Now, you do need to be flexible because things will happen. Laws may change, external circumstances may change. And so you may need to flex and adapt, but you should still have a strong pathway for moving forward. And if you're keeping in touch with your migration advisor, they're going to help you stay motivated to know that the hard work you're putting in, the time and money you're putting in is going to pay off. So if you believe that GSM program is for you and you're ready to give it a go, but you want support, then hey, we'd love to be your migration superhero. At Aspire Australia, we will guide you on each step of that journey, and we've used our 25 plus years of experience to put together a 7-step pathway that closes the gaps and makes sure that we use our know-how to help you achieve your dream of living and working in Australia. As for us, we love rules because they show us where the boundaries are and how far we can push. And it's at those boundaries that we unlock our superpowers to find the way forward for you. So if you want a fearless, confident, and understanding advisor, then I invite you to get in touch and see how we can help.